New York has officially launched their vaccine passport. And now we're getting reports that the Biden administration is preparing a national coronavirus vaccine passport scheme for Americans. The idea would be, if you want to board a plane, you got to have your vaccine passport. You want to go to the movies, you want to enter a store, you have to have your vaccine passport, much like we saw in Asia last year. The idea would be that you'd have a smartphone app. You would scan a barcode proving you have been vaccinated. Now, the government of the United States can't just do this. They can propose the vaccine passport system. It's going to rely on a coalition between private sector companies, for-profits and nonprofits, and it seems like this will happen. Look, first they said you have to wear a mask if you want to enter, and everyone said, fine, we'll wear a mask. It's no big deal. But when that happened, everybody started saying the next step is going to be mandatory vaccination. And guess what? We're actually entering this world of mandatory vaccinations. In Europe, European EU leaders are demanding a vaccine passport because we need it now more than ever. The vaccine is our opportunity to put COVID behind us and finally move forward. Now, my friends, I'm not in any way opposed to the vaccine. Not at all. In fact, I will even go as far to say we need to talk about the philosophical ramifications of a vaccine passport because a lot of people are going to have a knee-jerk reaction saying it's the worst possible thing imaginable. No, the authoritarianism is, the government mandate is, and the cultural enforcement is, but vaccines are pretty good. Now, should this be done in our country, restricting people from being able to live and work and consume and go about their normal daily lives? I got to say, I honestly don't think so. And it was because I had a conversation with someone the other day, a regular guy, and he just said, listen, if the vaccine is available to you and it will keep you safe, and there are people that choose not to get it even though they could, why should everyone else have to deal with that? In which case, well, many people are questioning why we would even need a vaccine passport in the first place. If people are choosing not to get it, well, then they're the ones who are going to be hurt for the most part, right? Well, it's ideas like this that are leading many people to believe that the vaccine passports are for something else. That I can't tell you. Honestly, I think it's just most people prefer safety over freedom. And that means you get the vaccine and they want to know you got the vaccine because it makes them feel safe. I'm not as concerned with the vaccine passport as I am concerned with the trajectory of our culture to always err on the side of safety. In an op-ed recently, Peter Hitchens said he got the COVID vaccine not because he wanted to help anyone else, because he was selfish and because he knew they were forcing him to do it due to these vaccine passports. This, the authoritarianism and the fear and the social enforcement, to me is scary. When I went to Venezuela, they required that I had a vaccine passport. These things have existed for some time. And I got to tell you, I'm a rather libertarian type person. So I don't like the idea of hard social enforcement. But if a different country said, you want to come into our country, here's our requirements. Okay, well, what am I supposed to say to that? I want to be a guest in their country. Here in the United States, I think we have to be treated equally under the law as per the 14th Amendment, which makes this whole argument very interesting. But we're going to have to get into it and see exactly how this is going to play out. It's not so simple to say for the majority, it's going to be a requirement that you actually get a shot. In some cases, they're saying you just have to be COVID negative. So you can actually go and get a test, and then your vaccine passport actually isn't even about a vaccine. So there's a lot of nuance here. And listen, by all means, have your opinions for, against, or whatever. I just want to make sure I'm presenting the information as accurately as possible. And then I'll give you my philosophical answer to this, because I'll put it this way, not to bury the lead. The problem we face is not about vaccine passports. It's about the disunity. This country is so fractured, and there is such a lack of trust between the polarized factions. No one's going to trust whatever system you implement, be it vaccine passport or anything. No one's going to want to sacrifice themselves for the country, for their fellow countrymen, if they don't trust those who represent them, which to me says the bigger issue is actually we're not unified. But we'll get into this. Before we do, head over to timcast.com to become a member and get access to exclusive members-only podcast episodes with people like Jeremy Hambley, comedian Aaron Berg, Jody Shaw, formerly of Smith College, comedian Chrissy Mayer, Kurt Schlichter, Jack Murphy. We have a bunch of really amazing members-only segments where we talk about a bunch of very important political and philosophical and cultural issues. So make sure you check it out. And when you become a member of timcast.com, you're helping support my work in the event that they shut me down or suspend my channels. But I will tell you this as well. We're going all the way with timcast.com. We're going to be hiring writers very soon. We've already started talking with some, and we may have articles popping up as soon as next week. We're going to be bringing on independent media producers, news personalities, and we're going to be doing a lot of work. And the news site is launching soon, and it's all thanks to you. Let's do this. Now, let's jump right into the story. Before we do, make sure you hit the like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and share the show if you really like it. Let's read from Insider. They say, the Biden administration is developing a national coronavirus vaccine passport scheme for Americans. The Biden administration is working on a vaccine passport program that would allow people to prove they have received coronavirus vaccination in order to enter venues which have been closed due to social distancing requirements, such as offices or movie theaters, the Washington Post and CNN reported. 5 officials who spoke anonymously told the Post that the White House is pushing efforts by federal agencies and private companies to develop the scheme. Vaccine passports have been widely touted around the world as a way for various industries to start returning to normal whilst minimizing the risk of COVID-19 outbreaks, and could be an entry requirement for anything from sports arenas, music venues, or restaurants to international travel. The passports will likely take the form of a scannable code displayed on smartphones, private developers told the Post, while users without smartphones will be able to print codes onto paper. New York has already announced an app called the Excelsior Pass, which will allow a user to prove they have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19 or have recently tested negative, Forbes reported. Now, that's very, very important context. I want to make sure that when we're having this discussion about whether or not people should be forced to be medicated for a certain reason, we are talking about the fact that you might just be able to get a negative test. The problem? Well, we've seen that many of these tests are fairly inaccurate, so it's creating ultimately kind of a, I guess, ethical and moral conundrum for people. Do you choose security or freedom? The problem is social enforcement, not government mandate. We often talk about how the government can't make you do this, the government can't make you do that. They don't have to if they control the media and society mandates it. But I want to talk about the true nature of authoritarianism. Let's read on first and get the full context. They say, one official suggested to CNN that vaccine passports could be required for people returning to work. The White House declined to comment to the Post on record, but pointed to comments made by Jeffrey Zients, the White House coronavirus response coordinator, who said at a press briefing in March, as we increase the number of people vaccinated, we know some people may have a need to demonstrate that they are vaccinated. The private sector and not-for-profit coalitions are already beginning to work on this. Our role is to help ensure that any solutions in this area should be simple, free, open source, accessible to people both digitally and on paper, and designed from the start to protect people's privacy. The idea of a vaccine passport is gathering momentum worldwide too. Similar schemes are being considered by the United Kingdom's government, and the European Union has announced plans for a digital green certificate, which will prove whether a carrier has been vaccinated, tested negative, or recovered from the virus. With this certificate, we aim to help member states reinstate freedom of movement in a safe, responsible, and trusted manner. European Commission Ursula von der Leyen said at a press conference earlier in March. The Ada Lovelace Institute, an NGO, said 30 countries around the world, including China and the UAE, are considering or already using a vaccine passport scheme as they seek to return to normal life. Insider's Mariana Gunaut reported. Now, in New York, it's here, baby. You want to be in New York? You want to live in New York? Get your vaccine passport because it is happening now. USA Today reports New York launches nation's first vaccine passports. Others are working on similar ideas, but many details must be worked out. Starting Friday, New Yorkers will be able to pull up a code on their cell phone or printout to prove they've been vaccinated against COVID-19 or recently tested negative for the virus that causes it. The first in the nation certification, called the Excelsior Pass, will be useful first at large-scale venues like Madison Square Garden, but next week will be accepted at dozens of events, arts and entertainment venues statewide. It already enables people to increase the size of a wedding party or other catered event. The app, championed by Governor Andrew Cuomo to support the recovery of industries most affected by the pandemic, is funded by the state and available for free to businesses and anyone with vaccination records or test results in New York. Like an airline boarding pass, People will be able to prove their health status with a digital QR code or quick response machine readable label. They'll need to download the Excelsior Pass app, enter their name, date of birth, zip code, answer a series of personal questions to confirm their identity. The data will come from the state's vaccine registry and also will be linked to testing data from a number of pre-approved testing companies. The New York system, built on IBM's digital health pass platform, is provided via blockchain technology, so neither IBM nor any business will have access to private medical information. An entertainment venue will simply scan the QR code and get a green check or a red X. The new pass is part of a growing but disjointed effort to provide vaccine passports or certifications so people won't have to hang on to a dog-eared piece of paper, worry about privacy issues or forgeries, or fork over extra cash to prove they're not contagious. In addition to IBM, open source computer experts who provide code anyone can use for free have been developing such systems, as have retailers like Walmart, which is also offering digital proof of vaccination to anyone who gets a shot in one of its pharmacies. The biggest challenge will be linking these systems together, so people won't need different apps for every venue or use. Open source computer advocates have already been collaborating to figure out how to piece together the different pieces of the puzzle, said Brian Bellendorf, executive director of Linux Foundation of Public Health, an industry-driven consortium that builds open source software. It's really the nerds getting together in kind of a nerd UN to piece this all together. New York hasn't worked out the connectivity issues yet, but hopes to eventually, as well as linking tickets to the Excelsior Press, so people going to an event at Madison Square Garden, for example, will be able to link their admission and health passes rather than fumbling with multiple apps. Another hurdle will be finding a consistent set of standards. So what counts as an acceptable test or vaccine in one state or country will count in another. There are at least two competing sets of standards being developed globally to allow secure access to information about vaccination status, particularly for international travel. They say New York is using its own established by its state health department, but it's not clear what will happen if or when Connecticut, New Jersey, and other states establish their own certification systems. Well, Europe is already planning this. The digital green certificate is planned to be interoperable and non-discriminatory. Healthcare IT News reports European leaders call for EU-wide vaccine passport as a matter of urgency. Let me show you something, and we'll talk about the politics of this. In a tweet from Harry Litman, who is the LA Times legal affairs columnist, he said, "Vaccine passports are a good idea. Among other things, it will single out the still large contingent of people who refuse vaccines, who will be foreclosed from doing a lot of things their peers can do. That should help break the resistance down." Charlie Nash says, quote, "That should help break the resistance down," and shows a picture of Star Wars character Moff Tarkin. That's right, break the resistance down. It's a really weird authoritarian way to phrase things. The resistance. Listen, I have been vaccinated by a bunch of different vaccines. Got them all here in my left arm. I've been to Egypt. I've been to Venezuela. I've been to Morocco. And I am grateful that these things exist. There are a lot of crazy diseases, man. When I went to, when I was planning on going to Venezuela, I think I had to get like 3 shots. They gave me a card, a vaccine passport. They wrote down and signed it saying I had been vaccinated for certain diseases, notably yellow fever. That's what you needed, I believe. And when I landed, I had to show that card with my passport. To me, it was no big deal. I did not want to get yellow fever. But there are some very serious political questions about what it means for Americans living in America. James Melville, verified Twitter user and described as Scotland communications, sponsorship, and social media consultant, freelance writer, talking about the UK specifically, says, "A vaccinated person can still get COVID, but are likely to have reduced symptoms because of the vaccine. But they can still potentially transmit the virus. So therefore, a vaccine passport makes absolutely no sense." It's an interesting point. And it's the point I was bringing up early on. I had a conversation with some guy at a bar the other day, and he just said, listen, he said he got his first vaccine. He was about to get a second. He was excited for it and glad to put it all behind him. But his attitude was very much, if you don't get the vaccine and you can, why should I be bothered by that? If he wants to go to the store and he's got a vaccine, he's fine. If you want to go to the store and you don't, that's fine. That's your problem. If people who get the vaccine can still catch COVID, but the symptoms are reduced, that's basically what Fauci has been saying, I believe, well, then the people who don't get the vaccine are the ones who get sick. I guess what's the big deal? I have another question, though. I have another philosophical question about this. I understand the seriousness of COVID, but it is not airborne Ebola. Why don't we have vaccine passports internally within the United States for every other disease, especially ones that are, more serious? Why don't we treat every other disease this way? Maybe that's the point here. Maybe that's, I guess, the goal is we'll start with COVID, and then eventually your vaccine passport will include a major list of all the vaccines you've gotten. We need to talk about the ramifications of this and why why this is happening. Let me show you the story first from WUSA 9. A lot of people are pointing out that vaccine passports should not be allowed until the FDA actually approves the COVID-19 vaccine. Or I'll point out a lot of people are saying no to the vaccine passport. Don't get me wrong. But it's important to point out that according to WUSA 9 CBS News, the FDA has not approved any of these vaccines. So I've been vaccinated. When I traveled, I got a bunch of vaccines. I got them when I was a kid. And sure, I got a little passport card. But those were approved by the FDA. And the FDA is a regulatory agency to make sure that these vaccines are safe. In my opinion, New York issuing a vaccine passport for something that has not yet passed the FDA, they're only under an emergency use authorization. I'm not a fan of this idea. Now, listen, I am a proponent of vaccine technology. And we're hearing now mRNA vaccine technology, which they're using for COVID, might be able to cure cancer. No joke, legit. The way the mRNA vaccine works is it effectively programs some of your cells to produce spike proteins. Your body then your immune system will attack those spike proteins, destroying them. Eventually, the vaccine, I could be wrong about this, so definitely fact me on this. My understanding is that it's not a permanent DNA change or anything like that. It affects the RNA in a certain location temporarily, but basically gives your immune system the understanding that we got to stop these things right here. When the COVID virus enters your body and it's got spike proteins, your immune system will attack and destroy them. It's a very, very interesting and brilliant technology, in my opinion. However, I do think it should go through rigorous testing. I understand why we have an emergency use authorization, and I got no problem with that. If people want to get this vaccine and resume daily life, that's great. They should have the opportunity to do that, assuming everybody, finds this to be safe. But the emergency use authorization is not approval. Mandating people take something that's not been approved yet, in my opinion, is wrong. Now, here's the story. They say 2 viewers reached out to the Verify team about the FDA's emergency use authorization, known as an EUA, and how it differs from full approval. During a Verify Ask the Experts Facebook Live held on March 5th, a viewer asked us to look into the FDA approval process. When will the FDA approve the vaccine and why have they not already? Lorice Wesley commented. Another viewer sent us an email. Is it correct that the COVID-19 vaccines are not yet approved by FDA and are only approved for emergency use? Why haven't the COVID-19 vaccines been fully approved by the FDA yet? What is the criteria that has been met for vaccines to be fully approved by the FDA? How long does it take for a vaccine to be fully approved by the FDA? We took your question straight to the experts. They say, is it true the vaccines haven't yet been fully approved? Sources, the FDA, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Dr. William Schaffner, Dr. Arnold Monto. There are 2 ways to get the vaccine green-lighted by the FDA, the EUA, emergency use, or by applying for a license through a biologics license application. The only difference really between the emergency use and the licensure is that volunteers are observed for a longer period of time to see the duration of protection and if there might be rare adverse effects that occurred down the road. In layman's terms, Dr. Monto said that follow-up period after complete vaccination is typically longer when considering full licensure. After the clinical trials are finished, the difference between the EUA and full licensure for the public's information or knowledge is basically the duration of follow-up or safety, not efficacy. Efficacy requirements are the same. For the EUA, it's an average of 2 months. But for a license, 6 months are required. The spokesperson for the FDA backed that up and said they usually expect manufacturers to provide data from study participants from at least 6 months after vaccination when applying for a license. So between the EUA and a license, the EUA was the quicker option to get vaccines out to save lives. Think of it as the fast-tracked version rather than the standard one. I understand that. And I understand that people want to get the vaccine. A lot of people are saying, just let me take the vaccine. There have been rare adverse side effects, however. There have been many, many stories about people getting the vaccine and then later dying. I am not a fan of these stories, and I have to wonder if the media is causing us massive damage, which brings me to the bigger picture on freedom, security, authoritarianism, and the fracturing of our country. During World War II, we had the U.S. Office of Censorship. We absolutely did. They had a Latin slogan: silence accelerates victory. Loose lips sink ships. Ideas that we as Americans think are abhorrent. Censorship is wrong, especially and particularly from the government. But during World War II, we accepted this. Why? Because we were not completely, but mostly unified. I understand we've gone through various periods of tumult, but we as Americans believed in America and were rallying around this idea of this country and what we believed in. And many of us, most of us, came together. Not completely, not always, that would be insane, but enough. Americans believed in the country. And they believed that although there were many problems with, politics, and there's always been complaints about politics, there was a lot more trust in that system. The real problem I see today isn't vaccine passports. If we were a unified country of shared values and we knew the Democrats held the same values as us and the Republicans held the same values as us as regular Americans, conservatives and liberals knew that although we disagree on wedge issues we mostly agreed on protecting each other, fighting for the common good. If that were the case, vaccine passports would be welcomed. People would say, absolutely, the government has our best interests, but they don't believe that. And I guess the saying goes, if you truly believe the government, for the most part, has your best interests at heart, you haven't been paying attention to history. The government has the best interests of itself. Now, what does that mean? Right now, in a hyperpolarized situation, I think that the U.S. government wants to make sure they maximize the amount of people whose lives are saved. I genuinely believe this. Not because they care about you, because they care about their strength and the system as a whole. The more people who survive and keep working, the better off the U.S. system will be. And that means wealthy individuals and the political elites will live more comfortably if more people survive. But it also means that typically they understand the idea of collateral damage. Collateral damage, as we've seen, just basically means they're willing to sacrifice a certain amount of people if it means, actually, I'll put it this way. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I'm not a fan of that idea. I believe we must always strive to protect the individual, give them adequate and proper information, and thus they will decide what's right for them, and then we'll be better. If people are deciding what's right for them, that from the bottom up, I think things will improve. It's funny that so many socialists want, the means of production controlled by the worker. In a sense, it's very similar. I just think the problem with socialism is you need a centralized authority to enforce those ideas. It doesn't work out all that well. So ultimately, do I trust major multinational corporations rushing out a vaccine? Not really, which is why I wait for FDA approval. I have no problem getting the vaccine, but I'm going to wait for one reason. I have food allergies. Legit, I have food allergies. So when they initially reported, y'all should wait, then I said, okay, then I will. And they also mentioned that pregnant women should wait, and they should. There was a story about a woman who had a miscarriage just after getting her vaccine, and she was very far along. And many people said, it's not a secret. The press talked about this. Here's the best piece of advice I can give you. Talk to your doctors about what's right for you. Now, here's the problem I have with vaccine passports. I understand the idea that if we come together as a nation and we trust in the system, well, maybe dumb. But if we did have reason to trust in the system more, then I don't see a problem with all of us coming together to fight for a common American good. However, I've seen the stories. I've seen the medical advice. I've seen the warnings from the companies themselves. If you have food allergies, then you might want to hold off. Okay, I heard that and I said, I'm going to hold off. The last thing I want is to deal with a very serious allergic reaction. I'm not about all that. But now you tell me I'm not going to be able to go into a movie theater or a store because of some medical issue? Well, then I should get an EEOC exemption. No joke. Maybe not EEOC, but a civil rights defense, meaning you cannot tell me that I can't go shopping because I have a counterindication or I have been warned that there is a reason why I personally have to wait a little bit to see how the vaccine goes before I get this shot. I have family friends telling me about people who have gotten the vaccine and ended up with a very serious adverse reaction due to some of these complications. I don't think that most people will face them. I've been reading the news. I've read a ton of it. I actually am sick of the hyperbolic, exaggerated stories about vaccine injury. Listen, medicine has side effects. I've gone to the doctor for a variety of things throughout my years traveling. And let's put it this way, traveling all over the world. All right. You eat a lot of crazy things in a lot of crazy places. You got to take care of yourself. And there's medications, they have adverse side effects. It's a reality. But what happens is we get a news story and it's like, I read one headline and it was like, man takes vaccine, dies shortly thereafter. And I'm like, whoa. And I read it and it was like 4 weeks after getting the vaccine, the 70-year-old man died. And I'm like, come on, dude. That's the kind of nonsense you get from the media that I just can't stand. And I also think there's an element of people were complaining about the vaccine because Trump is the one who pushed it through. Biden took credit for it, didn't thank Trump. Conservatives got mad. Yes. They weren't expecting a vaccine. I think the Democrats wanted to exploit a tragedy. And of course, the Republicans, everybody wants to do it. Trump got the vaccine through. He got it through quickly. And in the end, it ended up working out fairly well, in my opinion. Now, there are some warnings that have been issued. And so I'm chilling. I'm in no rush to go out and take a vaccine that has not been FDA approved. I understand emergency use authorization is still okay, but they mention in this article from the CBS source that it means they don't know about long-term effects. And I got to tell you, man, I got food allergies. So what? I suppose the alternative then is take a test, you come up negative, you're good to go. I think this ultimately falls onto the individual for responsibility. If the government truly wanted to maximize the amount of people who are, going to survive or be healthy, then they should let people choose for themselves. And, well, there you go. If there are people who don't want to get the vaccine, well, then so be it. It's their choice. And if they get sick and they get put in the hospital, I mean, it's on them. Now, again, talk to your doctor. Your doctor knows better than any pundit or personality or TV doctor or whatever. He's going to tell you what's right for you. But why should everyone else be hindered with having to use this app to travel around or go get tests if there are people who choose not to get the vaccine? It's their choice. They're the ones who will get the symptoms, right? I don't think the logic here makes a whole lot of sense. And so that's why I want to bring up Peter Hitchens. He said, I've had the COVID jab and all it cost me was my freedom. He says, so sorry, Your Majesty, but I have had my first COVID vaccination for wholly selfish reasons. I did not do it for the good of others, but for my own convenience. And I will have my second for the same purpose. A very important part of my family now lives abroad, and I am deeply tired of not being able to see them. I get the strong sense that any sort of travel and plenty of other things will be impossible if I don't have the necessary vaccine certificate. I want to stress this point to all of you. When I wanted to go to Venezuela, I had to have a vaccine passport. I think if another country wants to say, you got to have the vaccine, that's their country, man. My issue is with the discrimination and, I'm going to say it, racism of the vaccine passport. Think about it. I've heard it over and over again from the left, from liberals, that voter ID is racist because so many people in impoverished communities and minority communities don't have IDs or don't know how to get them. Well, I don't believe that's true, but based on that argument, you think these people are going to know how to get a COVID passport? You think poor people have smartphones? Now, that's my problem here, ultimately. The discrimination against poor minority individuals. I believe that we will end up seeing a kind of feudalism, a kind of caste system. The people who are wealthy enough to afford smartphones to get the passport app, congratulations, they'll have no problem. The people who know where they can find their vaccination center and get their vaccine, no problem. The poor people who lack the ability to take time off of work, who can't find their way to the stores, to the pharmacies, to these vaccine locations, and don't even have a smartphone, fine, they'll print out a piece of paper. Sure. Then wouldn't anyone print out a piece of paper? You see the problem here? Ultimately, what I think will happen is you're going to have a whole lot of poor people being barred entry because they didn't have the means that the wealthy, upper class, progressive suburbanites do. And so it goes, doesn't it? Giving up your freedom for a jab. But what will this really mean for the poor? The people who are most offended by, who want all of these changes for security, uppity, well-to-do progressives and liberals. They want these rules, even though it's a detriment to the poor. I've brought it up many times, but you take a look at the things they protest. For Black Lives Matter, they're complaining about the NYPD in impoverished neighborhoods. They're not complaining about a local sheriff's department for a small town. The police brutality story is always big city, Democrat-run cities, isn't it? Now you think that giving the government in these big Democrat-run cities more power is going to make less institutional racism? No, sorry. I think it's going to create it's going to absolutely double down on all of the institutional racism. It's going to make it harder for poor people to move up. It's going to primarily affect those who have been impacted by systemic and historical racism. What I mean by that is, if you are poor and your family is poor and you inherit nothing and you struggle to survive and you're trying to make ends meet and they add more and more layers to make it harder and harder and harder, they will create their caste system and it will be institutionally racist. So I'll tell you this. You want to get your vaccine passports. First, you've got to build the confidence of the American people, which you don't have. So good luck. Second, you've got to get FDA approval, in my opinion. Third, you must guarantee that impoverished communities are not negatively impacted nor segregated because of this. You do not create a caste system. There's a lot of things they got to do before they make this work. And in my opinion, I just don't see it working. I really don't. But I do think it will happen. And I do think most people will begrudgingly fall in line. But if too many people say no to the passports, it won't get implemented. I wonder if that will exist. So let me just say, my ultimate opinion on all of this, I got to tell you, is rather neutral. I wish we were a nation that came together in agreement over the greater good that will benefit and strengthen America. Donald Trump wanted to make America great again. That requires the people of this country working with each other and recognizing shared values. Because we don't have that, many people on the left and the right don't trust the vaccine passport. Establishment Democrat types do, and I would love it if everyone did, but we don't. And so what'll end up happening is a lot of people are going to refuse to get vaccinated. Look, I'm a fan of the vaccine. I'm glad it got rushed out. I think Donald Trump did a good job. I think he deserves credit for this. And I think vaccines are overwhelmingly safe. I think anyone being honest will tell you there are going to be adverse reactions. There are instances, as they mentioned, of vaccine injury, but it's rare, extremely rare. That doesn't mean, listen, I think one of the biggest problems you get is with the media, is that they're mean people. And they'll tell you when you're actually concerned, they'll say, oh, you're dumb, you're an anti-vaxxer. That's stupid. Talk to your doctor. They'll tell you what's right for you. And you ultimately make the choice for yourself. I do think that if they want to roll this out, first and foremost, give people the option to just get a test. And if they test negative, congratulations, we're good to go. If it's good for 3 months, fine. If it's good for 6 months, whatever. Figure it out. And then I'll walk in. And when I went on the Joe Rogan show, they gave me one of those tests. And I was negative for COVID. So how long is that going to last? Am I good? It was no big deal. It was this little thing and they clicked it on my finger. I didn't feel a thing. In fact, I play guitar, so I got like crazy calluses. And like she tried really hard to get a sample. You don't feel a thing. It's no big deal. I am not opposed to us as Americans coming together to make this country better. Nay, I think we must. But you have to recognize we don't all agree right now. So I think the negative test thing is good. Fine. The problem with the smartphone app is that poor people and people who can't afford smartphones, I know they're cheap. I've worked in tech for a long time, but there's going to be a lot of people who don't have smartphones. Not going to be able to get it. Homeless people, for instance. We're going to bar them. Man, these are tough philosophical conundrums. They are. Ultimately, I just wish we were honest. And that means solving this problem is going to be about compromise. If many of these liberal types have no problem with the vaccine, by all means, congratulations, you can get it. And then we need to make solutions for those who don't want it because they're still Americans and they still have rights. We want to protect everybody. Let's just be honest and talk about it. I am not saying compromise with people who are who think crazy conspiracies. I'm saying maybe the issue is if you have the vaccine, you're going to be fine. But let the other person decide for themselves. The challenge here then becomes, I guess, those who want universal health care. That's a whole other conversation. So we'll get into that. Go over to youtube.com/TimCastIRL. We will be live tonight at 8 p.m. talking about the philosophical conundrum that is vaccine passports, among other things. And I want to have an honest conversation. Lastly, and most importantly, if I get anything wrong on these vaccine things, by all means, fact check me and check with your doctor. Don't take my word for it. That's what everyone should be saying. Because you'll go to your family doctor and he's going to be like, well, you know, I like that Tim guy, but he did get these things wrong. Check this out. And then he can back it up for you. When I go to the doctor and he tells me he's going to give me like hydrofazo, blah, 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 whatever, you know, azine, I'm like, I don't know what that word means, but I trust my doctor. So doctor tells me it's safe. Best thing I can do is say, all right, doc, patch me up and send me on my way. And so it's difficult. Yeah, it is. That's the reality. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be tonight at youtube.com/TimCastIRL live. Come hang out. We read your comments live on the show, and I will see you all then.